Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. This is the first session of navigating NRCS programs. It's going to be hosted by our conservation technical assistant, Sarah Leal, and then we have a rancher, Brad Hanson, who's also going to join us. So yeah, feel free if you have any questions. The Q&A is down at the bottom of your screen. You can type in any questions there, and we'll have time at the end to cover those. So other than that, Sarah, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Like Robin said, my name is Sarah Leal. I'm the Conservation Technical Assistant with California Rangeland Trust, and part of my role is to connect landowners, ranchers with conservation-related resources. So what better way to do that than talk about NRCS-related programs? So the one program we're going to talk about today that falls under the NRCS umbrella is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, also known as EQIP. Go ahead to the next slide. So just a brief overview of NRCS. It stands for the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and it involves voluntary conservation programs that help farmers, ranchers, forest landowners with technical and financial assistance. And so this agency, it's a federal agency that branches off of the USDA, and it started during the Dust Bowl era in the 1930s due to the need for soil-related assistance. And it has now branched off and become the Natural Resources Conservation Service due to the addition of water, air, plants, animal energy-related resource concerns that they address. Next slide. So as we're discussing NRCS programs, I just want to highlight just how important these programs are, not only to the people, the landowners that are directly impacted by them or receiving the assistance, but also the surrounding communities. Obviously, the Dust Bowl is a perfect example of how the soil erosion that was occurring during that time also affected the surrounding neighbors. This is also seen in water conservation, water savings for the surrounding community, wildlife habitat improvements, boost wildlife populations for the area. Grazing, improves soil health, and weed abatement also impacts the surrounding neighbors. So that is definitely something to keep in mind when discussing NRCS programs and their impact. So getting started with NRCS programs, obviously you can just, you don't have to be eligible through our eligibility requirements to receive technical assistance. But if you're receiving financial related assistance through our programs, you do have to meet certain eligibility requirements to apply. So during this process for maintaining eligibility, you have to work with both NRCS and the Farm Service Agency, also known as FSA. And some documents they're going to want to see are evidence of control. So this is like a lease or a deed, tax ID information. They want to see that your AGI or adjusted gross income is less than $900,000, and that's average over 3 years. And they're going to want to make sure that you are HEL or highly erodible land and wetland compliant. So they want to make sure that you're not they're not putting money towards something that is going to negatively affect soils or have adverse effect on our wetlands. And then also with FSA, they're going to want to set up your farm record. So that's like a farm number and have all your information in their system. So in order to get it set up with them, you're going to want to find your local service center. So you can go to the NRCS or USDA page to just put in your state, your county, and it'll spit out the local NRCS and FSA offices. You can go to your FSA office first and start this process, or you can go to NRCS and just kind of get a foot in the door, let them know you're interested in applying, and then go to FSA. You don't have to do either or, but just personal preference. I will say that it might be helpful to go to FSA during the beginning stages of this process, because just making sure that you're eligible and getting all these documentations in, just make sure you're all set up for NRCS when you start working with them. So yeah, something to keep in mind with that. And yeah, FSA and NRCS offices, they may share the same office, or they might have different addresses. It kind of depends on the county and the area. So yeah, just check your local service center, search, and go from there. Next slide. So for the application process, you can first meet with NRCS, like I mentioned before, after determining eligibility, and then turn in your application kind of during the start of the process. Or you can meet with NRCS and have a site visit and then turn in an application after you kind of have a better idea of what you want to apply for. Either works. You can turn in an application at any time. There's different like ranking periods and application deadlines, but the application is open to just be turned in whenever during the year. After all this is done, you can work with NRCS to create a conservation plan, which I'll touch on later. And then once all of that is done and the draft plan is created, the plan gets ranked in the system. And then per the ranking, funding selections are made, and you can figure out whether or not you're selected for funding. So during the process of working with NRCS, when you're starting these discussions with your NRCS planner, again, like I mentioned before, you can do a site visit. And during the site visit, you'll have them, or they'll identify different resource concerns that may be on your property. And after those resource concerns are identified, they can match that with a practice that will aim to address that resource concern. And also through this process, they'll help you determine if there's a program that would be a good fit for you. And we'll mention that a little bit later on. But NRCS planners typically follow the 9 steps of planning. So that's identifying problems and opportunities, determining objectives, doing the inventory and assessment, et cetera, till we get the final plan together with the landowner or producer. Next slide. So the 2 most popular programs that people apply for with NRCS are EQIP and then CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program. But for this presentation, we'll just focus on EQIP, but the next webinar next week will be focusing on CSP. Go ahead. So what is EQIP? It is a voluntary conservation program that provides cost share assistance if selected for funding. So again, it is an application process. There is no guarantee that you will get funded. You could be funded the first year apply. You could be funded several years later. It's just up to funding availability or what you're applying for and all of that. When you work with your planner to develop a plan, you can make that plan up to 15 years long, but most of the time that's not how long they'll be. They'll typically be less than 5 years. And this program specifically is best suited for first-time NRCS program participants. And another reason for this is because it has just a wide variety of practices, and it's not as intensive as certain other programs. And another thing to keep in mind as you go along this process is you must follow NRCS standards for the practices that you choose. Go ahead. So a couple of practice examples under EQIP that ranchers like to apply for are things related to livestock water, so like pipelines, solar pumps, troughs, etc., cross fencing, grazing management, weed treatment, wildlife habitat management. These are just a few examples, but there's a wide variety of practices that could potentially be applied on your property. And if you're just curious to browse through what's available, the Field Office Technical Guide is a really good resource. This is an NRCS website and what a lot of planners use to look at documents and find more information about certain practices. You can put your state in, and then under section 4, of this guide, you'll see all the different practices that are available. Next slide. So this is just an example of when you use that search tool. You can pick a practice that you're interested in, for example, grazing management. They're also organized by code, so this one's 528. You click on that, and then it'll spit out some documents that you can browse through. These include the practice standards that are included or relating to each practice, and also the implementation requirement document that you will fill out with your planner when you go along the planning process later on if you're selected for funding. So yeah, the practice standards, statement of work, etc., all of that is under that, and also some additional resources you might be interested in relating to each practice. These are good to look through if you're curious about whether or not you want to apply. And for example, for something like fence, I'll use that example a lot. Some people might want to install a certain fence, but it might not meet the NRCS practice standards. So that's something to reference if you're interested in a certain practice. And again, on the right, this is the implementation requirement, just draft document. That's something you'll work through with your planner, where you're just writing out, for example, a grazing plan, and going through the requirements. Next slide. So once your resource concerns are identified on your property after the site visit, you're going to do your practice selection. And so you can reference the field office technical guide for examples, or work with your planner on certain ideas. But when you're going through the practice selection process, a lot of it is dependent on it's all dependent on what fits your situation. So a practice may be available, but it may not be a good fit for what you have on your operation. For example, NRCS does not cost share like simple repairs. So if you have a fence that's old and needs repairs, it could be nice to get it completely replaced, but that is not a good fit for an NRCS program cost share related assistance. If it's functional and can be something that you can quickly fix. Sometimes too, it's not even completely cost effective. For example, you can reference the cost share rates for NRCS, and sometimes it's just more cost effective to do a simple repair on your fence than to just get it completely replaced and redone. So that's something to keep in mind going through the process. Next slide. So also a part of EQIP, there's different initiatives that could be important to be aware of, or something to keep in mind as well. One that is nationwide that was just released this year is the Regenerative Pilot Program, and that one is focused on like soil health and things related to that. There's certain practices that could be done under this program. So that's, if you're interested in that, you can work with the NRCS planner on practices that are eligible, or you can reach out to one of us and we have the resources to share with you. That one's nationwide, but a lot of EQIP initiatives are region specific. For example, the Joint Chiefs Landscape Restoration Partnership. That one is focused on like forest health and management, and that's only in certain areas of California. Again, a lot of these are based on what the priorities are for these different regions. So like in like a lot of areas in Northern California, forest health and management are extremely important. So they're putting more money towards that in those areas. Another one is livestock predator interaction management. And again, that one is focused on certain areas that are most affected by livestock predators. And these are important to keep in mind because they're separate kind of fund pools for them. So a lot of money is being, for example, being poured into the regenerative pilot program. There's also separate fund pools for these other initiatives that you could apply towards instead of just the general pool of money. This is not the final list of EQIP initiatives that are available. There's a lot more that are available. And again, region specific, certain areas might have like water conservation related initiatives, or air quality related initiatives or something like that. So yeah, region specific and something to keep in mind. Next slide. So I mentioned cost share rates. That's what NRCS calls what they're going to be providing you at the end of the practice once it's certified complete. Cost share rates typically cover 50 to 75% of the project cost. So they're not going to completely cover whatever it is you're going to want to be doing, but it significantly helps. And historically underserved rates are a little bit higher. Historically underserved groups include like beginning farmer, rancher, veterans, stuff like that. That's something that you check when you fill out your application. There's a little section on if you meet one of the historically underserved requirements. Each practice has a scenario, and these scenarios have different rates. So a good example of this is weed treatment, because there's a very stark difference in price. Just for spot treatment, chemical treatment, that's going to be almost $202 an acre this year. But for ground application, it's about $66 an acre. They do the scenarios based on how much like time, energy, money, effort is going to go into each practice. So since spot treatment is going to take a lot more time, energy, effort, etc., it's a higher payment rate than just the ground application. Next slide. So the ranking process, I mentioned the ranking process previously. Once your application is turned in, you have a draft plan submitted in the system, that's going to get ranked. Applications are ranked in the NRCS Conservation Assessment Ranking Tool, or CART as it might be referred to. And that's where NRCS planners submit information and answer questions based on inventory assessments and client input. So all the information that they gathered during their site visits, that's stuff that's going to be considered in the ranking process, and also things that you have added as the landowner, also involved in that. So there's several factors that are considered in the ranking process. That's going to be cost effectiveness and level of performance, the treatment of resource concerns or national priority resource concerns, the magnitude of the environmental benefits resulting from the treatment, and also if you're compliant with federal, state, local, tribal laws. All of those things are taken in consideration. For example, the last one, if you're someone that maybe has had a contract in the past but hasn't like fulfilled certain practices or doesn't, just doesn't have a great track record in the system, you might be ranked a little bit lower because of that. And also they want to make sure that the practice is going to be, like you're going to get the most bang for your buck, and going to be something that, has the largest conservation impact. So those are all things that are taken in consideration for the ranking process. And there are different fund pools that applications can be ranked in if eligible. So if there's like a water conservation or something related fund pool and you're doing something that addresses that, that could fall under that fund pool. Or example, like the initiatives, that's another thing that your application can go under. Something also to keep in mind is that throughout the state, there are local working groups that partner with the resource conservation districts in the area to provide input on what local regional priorities are. So if you think that a cost share rate is too low or something, and based on what the prices are in your area, or if you think more money should go towards forest health or grazing or something in your specific region, that's something to bring up in your local working groups, because the state office does take that into consideration. Next slide. So you are selected for funding. What happens next? It's very important that you do not start work until given the okay from NRCS. Very, very, very important in that process, because there are some things that might need to be, sorted out before the practices can be implemented. You're going to be working with NRCS on the implementation requirements after you're selected. So that's that document I showed previously. And then also part of the process to consider is that you have to wait for the cultural resources clearance before starting a project. So NRCS has archaeologists that are supposed to go out to the property if deemed necessary, to make sure that you're not going to be disturbing or negatively impacting any culturally important or historically important item or anything like that. And so if someone needs to come out, they're just going to walk the property. If there's nothing that is going to be impacted, okay, you're good to start. If there is, they're just going to want to have you avoid it. So say there's like something of historical importance that would be in the way of a livestock pipeline that you want to, put in. You're just going to that will have to be moved. Next, you'll have to follow a schedule of operations. So that's something that will be given with the contract. It will lay out the practice, the date it's due, and the payment rate that you're going to be given. And then if you have something scheduled for, say, next month, 2026, or if you have something due in 2027, but you want to do it next month, you can do things ahead of schedule, and you can get paid out on that as long as you have all the implementation requirements and cultural resources certified. Next, you would want to contact NRCS when a practice is complete to get it certified for payment. So in order to get your payment, you're not going to get any of the money ahead of time. You only get paid after the practice is completed. So when you do get that practice completed, you're going to call your NRCS office, shoot them a text or anything like that, have them come out. They're going to certify that it meets all of their standards and specs, which are the things that they're following from that field office technical guide. And as long as it meets all of that, then you'll get certified for payment. Depending on how long it takes for someone to get out to the property and fill out that certification document, it can be a pretty quick process, but it's all dependent on staffing, how long it takes someone to get out there and do that work. But once it gets certified and sent up the chain, it doesn't take too long for it to get deposited into your account. Another thing to mention is that payments are reported as income for taxes. So that's something that you'll have to keep record of come tax season. And once you're done with all the practices, the contract is closed out and you're done. And you can apply for another contract or, do something like that as long as it doesn't, as long as it's not kind of the same thing as you did previously. Again, practices must be beyond their lifespan to be done on the property again. Some practices like weed treatment, they have a very short lifespan because those things, come up every year. But practices like fence or pipeline or something like that, they have a longer lifespan before you can do that again on your property. Next slide. So you get your contract, you get your conservation plan. These are the contents that will be within it, or at least some of them. You're going to have maps showing when and where the practices should be applied, soils maps, some other like location map type things. You'll have your implementation requirements and your standards and specs. You'll have all the inventory and assessment information that was taken into account for ranking. You should also get your ranking information, assessment information in your contract. And then you're going to get that schedule of operations that just lays out everything you need to know, dates, cost share amounts, all of that. Next slide. So some questions that come up with people that have a contract or people that are considering having a contract. What if you want to sell the property, but there's an NRCS contract that's applied to the property? You do have to give notice to NRCS before the sale. Make sure you are keeping active communication with your NRCS office through this process. The contract can be transferred to the new owner if they agree to it, or the contract can potentially be canceled. But there's some caveats to that. So yeah, keep in contact with your NRCS office if you're interested in doing something like this. They'll try to work with you as much as they can. And then what if I fall behind a schedule on a practice? If you fall behind schedule on a practice, it's not a huge deal as long as you're like actively working towards it. So like if you need to hire out a contractor for something, but they had to reschedule and it's taking a lot longer for them to get out there, or weather has altered your ability to do a certain practice, you can either get the contract modified, which is, just it's not a huge deal, just some background NRCS paperwork and such, or they'll give you maybe potentially a little bit of wiggle room. It kind of depends on the office and how they operate, but not the end of the world if you fall behind schedule on a practice, as long as it was not intentional. What if you can't cover the upfront costs of your contract? That is something that a lot of people struggle with because some of these contracts can be high dollar, where it's like all the labor and the materials costs can be really high, and some people might not have the means to do that just all at once. Loan options are available, and we'll talk about this in one of our later webinars. And there's also advanced payment options for historically underserved producers. So you can get it's like 50% of your cost share rate up front, and then you get the other 50% at the end of the contract once it's certified as complete. So overall, just general theme is make sure you're in communication with your NRCS office. Just let them know if you're maybe going to be delayed, or let them know if you're having issues with anything, and they're going to work to make sure that, you know, you're going to work to make sure that everything is resolved. They'll work with you to figure things out. Next slide. And that is it. Thank you so much for joining. And I'll open it up for questions.
Great, Sarah. So one that popped up while you were talking was, are the dates that applications are due and funding cycles posted online, or can they be shared? Can you kind of explain how that works?
Yeah, this year was a little different because of the government shutdown affected the application deadline, and then there was like a national deadline. They vary year to year. It's usually around the same time, but you can find that on the NRCS websites, or it might be easiest just to reach out to your local NRCS office. In the past, there's been like, yeah, it's in the past, deadlines for applications vary from like state to state and stuff like that. So you might not get the most direct answer online. So just calling your local NRCS office is a good option. We are also a good resource for that information. So in our landowner newsletters and our social medias, we'll be releasing information like that as it comes out. We did that a little bit earlier this year for this most recent funding cycle. So just, stay up to date through our newsletters or our social medias, and we'll try to get that information to you a little bit easier than having to, call or look online.
And from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's encouraged to turn in an application at any time, right? Like
Oh, yes.
even if
Yes.
the fund, if it closed in March or say February, they could still turn in an application in April and
Right.
funding might open or something else might come up. Is that kind of how it works?
Yeah, you can turn in an application at any time. Just like if you want to, like for example, this year, if you turn in your application in January, you'll just be on schedule to get all the draft plan and everything ranked and submitted by this upcoming ranking deadline, which is actually this month, later in the month. And so those deadlines usually just correspond with the NRCS kind of ranking deadlines and stuff like that. But you can, turn in an application at any time, and they'll get you put in the system and get the planning process started.
Great. I think that is a really good takeaway for people, because I definitely always thought there was a specific date and then you miss that. So, you need to wait until the next one. So it's really good to know, like, no, start working on it now. And
in some cases, it might be easier for the NRCS planners because they're not kind of in a rush to get everything in by the ranking deadline or anything like that, and they have more time to, work on the plan, develop the plan with the landowner. So
great. That's good to hear. Anyone else, you can type your questions in the Q&A. Oh, I see there's another one. And then you're also welcome to raise your hand and I can unmute you if you feel like your question needs more context. Question was asked, are tribes eligible for funding?
Yep. Yeah. And in some cases, there are eligible for additional funding. Yes, if you're a tribe, you can definitely apply and work with your NRCS office on options and resources for that.
Great. For the initiatives you mentioned, how can folks find out if there's any initiative in their region?
Yeah, some of it is like local office outreach. I know like local offices over where I'm at, they'll like reach out to, or provide the information and make it available to the landowners in the area. Or you can find that kind of stuff on the NRCS website. I think that's something good for us to take note of, because we can definitely keep tabs on initiatives in what areas, and we can release that through our landowner newsletters and social medias and whatnot. So that's something that we'll take into consideration and keep in mind.
Great, great. And we will get to the rancher in just a minute, I promise. We just had a few more questions and then we'll hear from that side of it. Since we are a land trust, how do conservation easements play into EQIP? Is there anything that they help enhance on the applications, or does it make you not eligible? How does that work?
If you have an easement, you are more than welcome to apply for conservation assistance through NRCS, EQIP, CSP, any of those. If anything, it just makes the NRCS planner aware that you are very serious about doing conservation work, and definitely a plus in their eyes. So
Great. Great. Okay. And then last one, how does EQIP apply to leased land or land with multiple operators?
yes. So if you lease a property, you will have to get that set up with during the eligibility, like FSA part of the process. You do need a deed. So you'll need to get that turned in so that FSA knows like the APN numbers, the parcel numbers, and that you basically have like permission to, operate and do conservation work on the property. And then you're also going to need a lease. And it doesn't have to be anything super formal, just like lease dates, signatures, stuff like that. And so that'll be all set up with FSA during that initial process.
Okay, good to know. All right, well, let's get into the rancher section.
Hey everybody, I'm Brad Hanson from up in northeastern California, Lassen County, outside of Susanville. Work on our family ranch here, and we've been involved with many NRCS projects and things, mostly EQIP and CSP at the moment. On the EQIP side, I would say most of our projects have been cross fencing. We've done that multiple times now on our ranch, cut pastures into smaller sizes, and it's also helped us too. We pretty much exclusively flood irrigate, and even though a lot of the pastures are permanent pastures, they do get tired. We have some native meadows we don't touch, but the rest of them we like to rotate. And being able to cut those fields up and replant with also having the cross fencing cost shared with NRCS, it's kind of been an offshoot benefit of not only are you doing more intensive grazing, but also able to replant pastures using their fencing programs. We've also done several water projects. They helped us drill a stock water well and put in troughs kind of in a feed ground area that it's a great feed ground, but it relies on Mother Nature in order to have stock water. So it's been really nice that we actually now have a water source out there, so we don't have to open up the fields that are next to the creek in order for the animals to have water, and then you're feeding, kind of right on top of your fields, which isn't ideal. So it's been fantastic in that regard. We've also done some juniper removal projects. We're kind of in the sage grouse area, so I think we got ranked pretty good for some of those projects, and that's been easy, straightforward, and also supplies us with some firewood. So kind of another win there. And most recently, we kind of have been we are in wolf country, and so we've had some losses there, and we've gotten funding through the EQIP predator livestock interaction. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but basically we're going to be able to put virtual fence collars on all the animals for a 5-year contract with NRCS. So it's and that one, I mean, the NRCS covers a big portion. We'll be out of pocket a chunk, but a lot of it is actually getting paid for by the NRCS. So we're excited about starting that one this summer and getting to see some cool results. Not only the predator side, if a collar doesn't move, maybe the calf or the cow is unfortunately gotten attacked, but also just being able to then, further kind of intensive grazing aspects. Yeah, Sarah's, we actually work with Sarah out of Susanville too, and she's been great to work with. Our NRCS office has always been very communicative to us as far as any new programs and stuff. When CSP came out, it wasn't us going to them. They actually came to us and said, hey, we think this would be a great fit. So it's been awesome working with our NRCS office. They kind of give us a heads up of anything that's coming up that, they think we could qualify for. I will add, we also have a conservation easement with California Rangeland Trust on our ranch. And I can't say for certain that it helped in finding matching funding for us, but I think it does. I think it does help when you're writing up a narrative and trying to find a funder that, you've done all these things that make your property better environmentally and better ecosystem and everything. I think does help in the funding part for if you're looking at conservation easements as well.
Thanks, Brad. Do you have anything else, any other insight just in the process of applying and getting selected for funding? In your experience, how long did that take, and anything related to that?
It's been great. It's pretty easy. I think for the most part, we haven't ever had too much, what would I say, delays or anything in getting funding. Everything's been quick. We're pretty familiar with the programs now, so we kind of know which ones, actually might fit and get approved. It's been pretty seamless, or at least for us, and that might be because we work with a great office too that does a lot of the legwork for us. But when reimbursements are quick. I'll say on the fencing too. I mean, if you build the fence yourself, it comes really close to actually, NRCS covering the whole thing, which is great too. But we've built some of the own fence, but we've also had contractors come out too, and contractors are very familiar with the specs of NRCS on that fencing. So I would just say it's all been pretty seamless and. Yeah, great opportunity.
I'm going to jump in real quick. Brad, can you elaborate on that a little bit? The difference between you building it yourself or using a contractor? How does that work with NRCS?
NRCS just pays you a per foot. And so, and Sarah can correct me if I'm wrong, but within that is obviously kind of an ongoing cost of materials, but also some aspect of the labor. And labor, quite frankly, is a lot of times more than half is on the labor side, especially depending on some of the terrain. NRCS helped us build a fence out after a fire came through on BLM, and it's super rocky stuff. And I mean, we hired a contractor for that one, and for sure, we weren't fully reimbursed as far as the whole cost of it, but that terrain's just terrible. So, on this easy stuff that we do just in the fields, cutting the fields that are fairly level and everything, it goes fast. So even the labor is not too expensive on that.
Yeah, that's a cool thing to note too with Brad's property is that they're adjacent to BLM land and they've done NRCS contracts on the BLM land. So that's also something to mention, is that that's a possibility too if you lease on BLM ground, as long as BLM gives you permission.
Yeah, the juniper too, we've done that on BLM through NRCS and stuff, and yeah, there's too many junipers, so it works great.
That's great. That is a really good point, Sarah. Brad, are there any projects that stand out in your mind as something unique where maybe you were surprised to learn that you could get funding for that type of project?
For sure, the virtual fencing collars, I think, is pretty neat, because I think that technology, it's more than just, locking animals in an area or knowing where your animals are at. I mean, the stuff they're coming out with now is they can, it's going to help you predict sick animals if they're not moving, and you can, zero in on that animal. It can, same with calving based on movements and kind of what that cow's doing, and heart rate and stuff. Some of the collars are starting to try to monitor heart rates and everything, so they'll know if they're going into labor. Oh, I got to go check this cow. So it was really cool to see that has some NRCS funding, even though it's designated as a like predator program. There's tons of other benefits that are going to come out of it.
Awesome. Some additional questions too. Would you do anything differently if you applied again?
Probably the only thing differently is start sooner. We've definitely had some projects get extensions, and multitude of different things. A lot of times it's weather, or you just didn't get to it that year, trying to do it yourself or hiring it out. So probably just really try to start sooner on it. I don't think there's any one that's necessarily done differently. Probably the only thing differently is maybe we didn't do enough, because there's a laundry list of stuff in there, and like we spray weeds every single year, and I don't think we've ever we've done weed spraying treatments through NRCS CSP program, but we've probably never applied for it in EQIP or in EQIP years ago, and we probably could have. So the only thing differently, I think, is just look at the list of things that NRCS has funding to help producers with, and pick out any ones that you're doing, and try to get some reimbursement for it.
Is there anything that you would say for people that are new to NRCS and EQIP? Like, do you have any advice for them when they're first applying?
I think the first thing, I'd try to go into your office and just make an appointment and have some maps of your place, so that they can get a good idea. I mean, I know there's Google Earth and Onyx and everything, so they'll be able to get a good idea. But and kind of in that meeting, just tell them your whole operation, and any goals that you have or aspirations for your property is probably just the first step. And maybe again, it's just us and having a really good office, but it's been really, really seamless and easy working with them. So I think that's the first step.
You mentioned that you've gotten extensions before. Is that a pretty easy process, or is that a lot of paperwork? And can you do it after the fact? Like maybe you already missed it. Can you then still ask for an extension, or do you always have to do it kind of before that deadline?
I think you got to do it before. I mean, we've always tried to be way out in front of that, and I think it makes it pretty, a lot more palatable for the office. I'm not 100% sure if you can do it after the fact, but I don't think we've ever encountered that.
When you're saying extensions, do you mean like you're running a little bit behind on a practice?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Because I think most of the fencing, it seems like it's usually a 3-year contract, or 3 years to get it done. Maybe it's a year. I don't entirely remember, but most notably, we've got a water project we've got to finish up this summer. That involves putting in like 5 troughs and a couple storage tanks that's going to tie into our underground mainline irrigation system, so we can actually get animals off the creek. Long story short, that one was supposed to be done last year, but when we realized that we weren't going to get it done, we just told our NRCS office, and they granted us an extension to get it done this year.
Yeah, again, that's a good example of just as long as you're communicative with your office, they'll make it work. And if it's going to take way too long, that's where like the modification process comes in, where they're going to just have to modify the plan on their side. You'll have to re-sign some documents, but yeah, not a huge sweat.
Good deal. We just had another good question come in. Can EQIP be used in conjunction with other federal programs like Partners for Fish and Wildlife, or like the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program?
I believe so. I haven't come across one of those, but I don't see why there would be an issue with that, because they're separate funding sources. They could complement each other pretty well. So if you get funded for something with Partners of Fish and Wildlife, and NRCS can pick up the slack in maybe another area, I feel like that would complement each other really well. So
Brad, do you have any experience? Have you guys done that before with another organization and EQIP, or no?
Not necessarily on the exact same project, but we've definitely had years where we've had EQIP fencing, and then we had another conservation organization, Point Blue, got a big block grant, and we did fencing that tied in with some of the NRCS fencing. So even though NRCS was just this portion of the fence, we've been able to extend that fence out to do other things, through other funding sources. So we've also worked with California Healthy Soils on the same property, but as long as it's a different project. I don't think we've ever had one though where two funding sources came together for a single project.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, they would still be separate. So there would be like a separate NRCS application and a separate additional funding source contract or application. So they wouldn't like merge together, but again, I think they would complement each other pretty well if done side by side.
Good deal. Well, does anyone else in the audience have any questions? You can raise your hand or type it in. Or Sarah, did you have anything else you wanted to cover with Brad?
No, I think that's all the questions that we have, unless anyone else has anything.
Good deal. Well, Brad, thank you so much for giving your time today and explaining what you guys have been working on. That's super exciting to hear. Do you have any parting words?
I'd just say if you're thinking about doing it, I would contact your NRCS office, because there's a lot of good funding opportunities out there to help you improve your ranch and get help cost assistance for even things you're already doing through the CSP program, which I know you guys will touch on next in the next webinar. But yeah, there's great opportunities out there.
Perfect way to tie in what our next webinar is going to be on, Brad. So yes, hopefully you all signed up for that one too. But next Monday, we'll be covering the conservation stewardship program and have another rancher on to talk about their experience with that. I also really want to remind you all that this is Sarah's job with the Rangeland Trust now, is she is going out and helping landowners to figure out these programs and the applications and the ranking and all of that. So please don't hesitate to reach out to the Rangeland Trust in general, or myself and Sarah. If you have any questions that came up on this that didn't get answered, or down the line, if you feel overwhelmed or anything, we're here to help you. And then I also want to promote the local working groups, because I'll be honest, I am on a board of a local RCD. And for a while, I didn't quite understand what the local working groups are. And after talking to Sarah about it and stuff, I do think it is a great way to get your voices heard and really affect what funding and programs are available through NRCS, and that they really do take in fact, Sarah, if you want to jump on, because you were good at explaining to me how they really do take feedback from those and what it affects within NRCS.
Yeah, I know the last working group that I was in, there was like a whole basically survey where you just went down what are your concerns in this region, where do you want to see money put towards, stuff like that. So, and that all gets sent up. So highly recommend attending your local working groups, because things do happen out of the conversations that take place there.
Yeah, absolutely. Elena, can you hop back to that last slide that has Sarah's contact info on it, just for anyone if they want to grab that? Yep, there it is. So if you guys want to reach out to Sarah, and then there's my contact info as well. This was recorded. We'll be cleaning it up and sending it out to you all. Everyone who registered, in an email, along with links to NRCS and all that good stuff. So thanks again for joining us. We hope it was worthwhile, and we're always open to feedback, and we hope to see you next Monday at the same time. Have a good one.